The autumn air in London carried a crisp bite, a whisper of approaching winter that danced through the towering historic walls of the Tower of London. Tourists bustled about, their murmurs forming a soft hum against the distant sounds of the city. Cars rushing over damp cobblestones, pigeons fluttering between discarded crumbs, the faint chime of a distant church bell marking the passage of time. Among them, Samira Al-Fayed strode forward with a sense of purpose that bordered on arrogance. She was impeccably dressed, her tailored navy coat hugging her figure, the silk of her hijab shimmering under the pale afternoon sun. Her heels clacked against the stone pavement with every measured step, the sound sharp, intentional. She was a woman who demanded attention, who had spent a lifetime ensuring that when she entered space, it adjusted itself to accommodate her presence. Yet as she approached the grand entrance where the royal guard stood, unmoving, she was met with something utterly foreign to her: indifference. The guard, Corporal Henry Whitmore, stood in perfect formation, his red tunic pristine, his polished boots planted firmly in place. His black bearskin hat cast a shadow over his expressionless face, an unwavering fixture in the ancient tradition of the British monarchy. He did not acknowledge her, did not flinch, did not waver. He simply remained, a silent sentinel guarding centuries of history. And that was precisely what ignited the flame inside Samira. Her lips pursed as she stopped before him, eyes narrowing in irritation. She had anticipated a moment of acknowledgement, a mere flicker of recognition, but there was none. She cleared her throat, loud enough to draw attention from the passing crowd. "Excuse me," she said, her voice laced with the entitlement of someone unaccustomed to being ignored. Nothing. The tension in her shoulders coiled tighter. The frustration she felt wasn't about this singular moment. It was the culmination of a lifetime of battling for dominance in spaces where she refused to be unseen. She stepped closer, the scent of her expensive perfume mingling with the cool air between them. "I'm speaking to you," she pressed, her tone sharper now, cutting like glass. "It is incredibly rude to ignore someone when they're addressing you." Still, there was no response. Her fingers clenched at her sides. A wave of humiliation threatened to rise in her chest, hot and suffocating. A few tourists had paused to observe the interaction, their expressions shifting between curiosity and amusement. Phones were already lifting, cameras capturing the brewing spectacle. Samira was no fool. She knew the power of public perception, the weight of a narrative carefully spun in her favor. And she would not be made a fool of, not here, not now. "You think you can just stand there like I don't exist?" Her voice rose, the carefully crafted elegance in her tone beginning to fracture under the weight of her fury. "This is discrimination. This is racism. You think because you wear that uniform you can look down on me? Is that it?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. A mother pulled her child closer, whispering something in his ear. An older gentleman frowned, adjusting the camera strap around his neck. The energy in the air shifted, a storm brewing in real time, one that no one was quite ready for but no one dared to look away from. Still, the royal guard did not move, did not blink, did not acknowledge her in the slightest. And that was when she snapped. "Get me a superior!" she shrieked, her voice slicing through the open space with a force that turned heads even from the other side of the courtyard. "This is unacceptable. I will not be ignored." The sheer volume of her outburst sent a flock of pigeons scattering into the sky, their wings flapping wildly against the sudden disturbance. A child gasped, startled by the raw intensity in her tone. The tourists who had initially watched with detached amusement now shifted uneasily. Was this a scene of injustice or something else entirely? Footsteps approached in hurried strides, the unmistakable sound of authority intervening. A security officer, Richard Rick Langley, arrived on the scene, his expression a perfect balance of calm professionalism and careful restraint. "Ma'am," he began, his voice firm but measured, "I need you to lower your voice. There's no need for this level of—" "No need." Samira's incredulous laugh burst forth, sharp as shattered glass. "I have been standing here addressing this man, and he refuses to acknowledge me. This is a blatant act of disrespect." Rick sighed inwardly. He had dealt with confrontations before, but there was something different about this one. Something calculated. Something off. "Ma'am," he said again, keeping his voice steady, "the royal guards are trained not to respond to provocation or direct engagement. It's part of their protocol." Samira's lips parted, her fury momentarily suspended in confusion. Protocol? That wasn't what she wanted to hear. That wasn't what would fuel the narrative she needed. She squared her shoulders, eyes flickering to the surrounding crowd, noting the way they whispered, the way the recording devices remained steadily aimed in her direction. "You're defending this?" she spat, turning her ire onto Rick now. "You're telling me that this man can stand there and humiliate me, and you call it protocol? Do you know who I am?" Rick held back a sigh. He had been in this job long enough to recognize the signs of someone who wasn't looking for a resolution, they were looking for a scene. And this scene was unfolding exactly as she wanted it to. "You are welcome to file a complaint," he offered, his voice a careful monotone. "A complaint?" she shrieked again, her voice teetering on the edge of something almost primal. "I want his name. I want his badge number. And I want to speak to someone with actual authority." A few feet away, a hooded figure stood just beyond the crowd, his phone raised, but unlike the others, he wasn't filming the confrontation. His camera was pointed elsewhere, directly at the CCTV camera mounted on the far wall. Because while everyone else was focused on the performance playing out in real time, the real story, the one no one saw coming, was unfolding in the shadows. And when the truth came to light, it would be unlike anything the world had ever expected. The weight of tradition rested upon his shoulders like an iron mantle, unseen yet inescapable. Corporal Henry Whitmore stood rigid, his boots firmly planted on the ancient stone beneath him, the very foundation that had withstood centuries of power struggles, betrayals, and shifting empires. His breath was steady, measured beneath the towering bearskin hat, his grip on the rifle unwavering. He had trained for this. He had lived for this. And yet, nothing had prepared him for the storm that now threatened to unravel everything he had been taught to endure. Samira Al-Fayed's voice rang through the air like a whip cracking against silence. It was shrill, accusing, brimming with entitlement and manufactured fury. Every syllable was a knife edge, honed to cut through the disciplined restraint of the uniformed man before her. But Henry was no stranger to conflict. He had served in places where true violence reigned, where silence meant survival, where a single misstep could mean the difference between life and death. And here, on the cold pavement outside the Tower of London, he had only one duty: to stand, to resist, to embody the unyielding strength of the Royal Guard. But the world had changed. No longer did the enemy wear a uniform, no longer did battles take place on blood-stained fields. Now the war was waged in the court of public opinion, and the weapons were no longer swords but cameras, held aloft, blinking red, hungry for scandal. The air crackled with the tension of a spectacle unfolding, an audience forming around them, murmuring in hushed voices as the woman's outburst intensified. She was relentless, pacing back and forth like a caged predator, her fury uncoiling in sharp bursts. "Do you think you're above me? Do you think you can ignore me?" she spat, her face contorted with indignation. "This is racism. This is discrimination. You are standing there like a statue while I am speaking to you, and you refuse to acknowledge me. I will not be disrespected." The words were fire, licking at the edges of the crowd's conscience, forcing them to take sides. Some shifted uncomfortably, others nodded in silent agreement. And yet, Henry did not move. His pulse thrummed in his ears, but his face remained impassive. He had been trained to withstand worse. He had faced drills that pushed his body beyond its limits, had endured officers screaming inches from his face, had been forced to remain motionless under blistering sun and torrential rain. But nothing tested a man's discipline like the piercing eyes of an outraged woman determined to break him. A bead of sweat formed beneath the weight of his hat, tracing a slow path down the back of his neck. He focused on his breath, on the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest, on the unbreakable resolve that tethered him to his duty. His presence here was more than just a ceremonial role. It was a legacy, an oath sealed by generations before him. But the world outside did not care for oaths. The energy shifted, darkened. The woman's voice sharpened, twisting the narrative like a blade, ensuring that her rage would be immortalized in digital memory. "Look at this," she gestured wildly, spinning towards the growing throng of onlookers. "Look at this man. Look how he refuses to acknowledge me. This is exactly what is wrong with this country. The arrogance, the sheer disrespect." She turned back to Henry, stepping dangerously close, her breath hot against the cold barrier of his stoic indifference. "Say something," she hissed. "Or are you too much of a coward?" The words slashed through the air like a challenge, daring him to react. Silence. A tremor of something close to desperation flickered behind Samira's eyes before she masked it with renewed fury. She wanted a response. She needed a response. Without it, Her fire would find no fuel, her performance no climax. Henry remained as he was, his gaze fixed on the horizon beyond her, seeing but not seeing, hearing but not listening. A camera flashed. Another phone was raised. The moment was being captured, twisted into whatever story the world would choose to believe. Somewhere in the crowd, a child tugged at his mother's sleeve, his small voice filled with curiosity. "Mummy, why is she shouting?" The mother shushed him quickly, casting an anxious glance at the people around her. No one wanted to be on the wrong side of the moment. Then came the tipping point. With a sharp inhale, Samira's hand shot forward, her fingers gripping the stiff fabric of Henry's sleeve. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. A royal guard had been touched. The air turned to ice. For the first time, something flickered in Henry's gaze, a momentary shift so imperceptible that only those who were watching closely would have caught it. His training screamed at him to stand down, to remain the immovable force he had sworn to be. But the old ways were being tested in new ways. And standing still in the face of modern warfare was beginning to feel like an impossible battle. Somewhere nearby, the sharp voice of a security officer cut through the rising tide of murmurs. "Step back, ma'am." Rick Langley pushed his way through the crowd, his presence commanding without needing to raise his voice. The moment he reached them, he positioned himself between Henry and Samira, his stance protective, authoritative. "Do not touch the guards," he warned, his voice firm, controlled. Samira recoiled as if she had been struck, her face twisting into an expression of incredulity. "Are you serious?" she demanded. "Are you actually defending this blatant mistreatment?" Rick inhaled slowly, his patience thinning, but his professionalism intact. "The royal guards do not engage," he stated, measured and unwavering. "They do not respond. That is their duty. You need to step back now." A choked, disbelieving laugh escaped Samira's lips. "This is unbelievable," she muttered, but the fire in her eyes had not dimmed. No, she was not done. Not yet. She turned sharply, her gaze scanning the sea of faces around her, finding solace in the blinking red lights of recording phones. "I will not let this stand," she announced, her voice carrying a promise of escalation. "You will all see. Everyone will see." Rick exchanged a glance with Henry, the silent understanding between them a tether in the storm. But this was only the beginning. As the crowd buzzed with uncertainty, as the digital world began its slow churn of narrative weaving, something deeper lurked beneath the surface. Somewhere unseen, somewhere just beyond the reach of the cameras, a quiet figure watched. And in the shadows, the real story had already begun. The air was thick with the aftermath of the spectacle, a suffocating cloud of tension that refused to dissipate. The murmurs of the crowd buzzed like static, their eyes flickering between the frozen figure of Corporal Henry Whitmore and the seething presence of Samira al-Fayed. The moment had stretched beyond its breaking point, teetering on the precipice of something unseen yet inevitable. And then, as if the world itself had been holding its breath, the first phone notification sounded, a sharp chime slicing through the stagnant air. It had begun. Somewhere in the vast, untamed wilderness of the internet, the moment had already been dissected, twisted, and repurposed into a narrative far beyond the truth. Videos uploaded in fragmented clips, captions plastered in bold accusations, strangers drawing battle lines in a war they did not witness but felt compelled to fight. The wheels of outrage spun swiftly, accelerating into an uncontrollable force. And Samira, standing at the center of it all, could feel it. The power shifting, the energy morphing into something tangible. She had ignited the fire, and now she watched as it spread. Her breaths came rapid and shallow, her chest rising and falling with the adrenaline of the moment. This was the turning point. She knew it. She could sense it in the way the crowd hesitated, in the way the security officer, Rick Langley, now regarded her, not as a victim, but as something else. A liability. Rick had dealt with plenty of incidents before, disruptions, arguments, even the occasional protester trying to get a rise out of the royal guards. But this was different. This was curated, deliberate. Samira wasn't just an outraged tourist. She was crafting something bigger, something beyond this singular moment. "I demand to speak to someone in charge," she snapped, her voice sharp and unwavering. "I will not be silenced." Rick exhaled slowly, measuring his response. His training had taught him that defusing a situation required balance, too much force, and it escalated into chaos, too little, and it spun out of control on its own. "Ma'am," he began, his tone deliberately neutral, I need you to lower your voice." "Lower my voice?" Samira echoed, her incredulity ringing loud enough to turn heads. "You want me to lower my voice after being humiliated in front of all these people? After being ignored, disrespected?" She spun to the gathering crowd, her arms outstretched in appeal. "You all saw it. This is the reality we live in. This is the treatment we're expected to accept." The crowd shifted, divided. Some watched in sympathy, nodding in quiet agreement. Others stood back, wary, their gazes flickering between the unyielding guard and the woman whose outrage had turned to performance. Rick clenched his jaw. He had seen this before, the distortion of reality, the molding of perception. Truth was no longer what had happened, but what people believed had happened. And right now, the belief was dangerously unstable. "Ma'am," he tried again, his voice steady, "I need you to step away from the guard." "Or what?" Samira challenged, eyes blazing. Rick hesitated, and that hesitation was all she needed. A single step back, a sharp intake of breath, and suddenly, she staggered. Her foot twisted on the uneven pavement, her balance momentarily lost. And in that fraction of a second, a new narrative was born. She gasped, the sound exaggerated just enough to be captured by the waiting cameras. Her body pitched forward, and though she never truly fell, the dramatic sway of her movements painted a different picture. A picture of a woman under duress, of a victim forced to retreat. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "She almost fell," someone whispered. "He intimidated her," another voice muttered. And then, like a match to dry kindling, the spark caught fire. Samira straightened, placing a trembling hand over her chest, her breath coming in uneven bursts. This is exactly what I was talking about," she said, her voice breaking just enough to sell the illusion. Rick's stomach turned. He had seen lies before, but rarely had he seen them crafted with such precision. This wasn't an argument. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was manipulation, masterfully executed. His radio crackled to life. "Langley, status update." He hesitated a fraction too long before responding. "Situation escalating," he murmured, his eyes never leaving Samira's. A knowing smirk flickered at the edges of her lips before she masked it with another tremble, another calculated breath. She knew she had won this round. But what she didn't know was that somewhere in the crowd, someone else had been watching. Not with the passive curiosity of the onlookers, nor the eager hunger of those recording. No, someone was watching with intent. And they weren't watching her. They were watching the cameras. The ones that had captured everything. The ones that had recorded the truth. The ones that, soon enough, would tell a story far different from the one she had woven. The internet was a beast that never slept. It devoured moments, digested them into narratives, and regurgitated them into something unrecognizable. By the time the first news outlets picked up the story, the truth was already lost beneath layers of outrage, speculation, and selective editing. The video had gone viral, millions of views in mere hours. The headline, designed to spark instant fury, was impossible to ignore. "Royal Guard's shocking disrespect, Muslim woman humiliated at Tower of London." It spread like wildfire. Clicks poured in. Comments ignited into a battleground of polarized opinions. Some demanded justice, others called it an overreaction. Some praised Samira Al-Fayed for standing her ground, others condemned her for orchestrating a scene. But no one, no one, had seen the full picture. Corporal Henry Whitmore's face, previously unknown to the world beyond his regiment, was now plastered across every social media platform. A man of duty, of unwavering discipline, was now the villain in a tale that wasn't his to write. Inside the barracks, where the world felt smaller, where the walls shielded them from the noise outside, Henry sat in silence. His uniform still crisp, his posture still straight. But something in his eyes had shifted. He had trained for combat. He had trained to hold a rifle steady in the face of chaos. He had trained to withstand the elements, to push his body beyond human limits. But this was an enemy he could not fight. This was war without a battlefield, and he had no weapon to defend himself. The room around him buzzed with tension. His fellow guardsmen moved cautiously, casting sideways glances, their words hushed. Some scrolled through their phones, their brows furrowing at the venom being spilled online. "Bloody hell, mate," one of them muttered, shaking his head. "This is getting out of hand." Henry said nothing. He had done nothing wrong. He had followed protocol. He had stood his ground, as generations before him had. But none of that mattered now. The world wasn't interested in tradition, in honor. It was interested in spectacle. And Samira had given them exactly that. Somewhere across the city, she was basking in it. The notifications on her phone didn't stop. Calls, emails, interview requests. Journalists eager to hear her side of the story, to give her the platform she so desperately craved. She had expected this. She had planned for this. And yet, beneath the surface, something gnawed at her. She had played this game before, woven narratives to fit her needs. She had turned small moments into grand injustices, twisting reality just enough to ensure it worked in her favor. But this time, something felt different. The reaction was bigger than she had anticipated. The reach wider, the backlash fiercer. Some of the messages she received weren't filled with support, but with suspicion. People questioning, digging, and worst of all, someone had found the full footage, not the cropped, sensationalized clip that had been circulating, not the carefully edited version that painted her as the victim, but the raw, uncut truth. And it was out there. She scrolled frantically through the comments, through the articles, through the endless flood of opinions. And then she saw it, a link buried among the noise. The footage they don't want you to see. Her stomach twisted. With trembling fingers, she clicked. The video began. Unfiltered, unmanipulated. And it showed everything. The approach, the provocation, the calculated theatrics. The moment she pretended to stumble. The moment she knew she had won. The comments beneath it were brutal. She planned the whole thing. Watch how she keeps looking around. She wanted an audience. She touched the guard first. That's against the rules. Why is no one talking about that? This is why you can't believe everything you see online. The blood drained from her face. No, this wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had controlled the narrative. She had crafted the story. She had manipulated the truth to her advantage. But the internet had a way of turning on its own. And now the tide was shifting. Her phone buzzed with a new email. A subject line that sent a shiver through her spine. We need to talk, urgently. She knew what was coming. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't in control anymore. The world outside moved at its usual pace. Cars rolled down the damp London streets, pigeons pecked at discarded crumbs near the curb, and the rhythmic chime of Big Ben echoed in the distance. But for Corporal Henry Whitmore, the world had shrunk to the four walls of his barracks, suffocating him under the weight of something invisible, yet unbearable. The air inside was thick with unspoken words, the usual camaraderie among his fellow guardsmen replaced by a heavy silence that no one dared to break. He could feel their eyes on him, the way they moved around him cautiously, as if he had become something fragile, something that might crack under pressure. But Henry Whitmore did not crack. He was a soldier, a royal guard, a man who had been trained to endure. And yet this was unlike anything he had faced before. His name was now everywhere. His face, once anonymous in a sea of disciplined uniformity, was now plastered across screens, debated over by people who knew nothing about him, about the oath he had sworn, about the unyielding silence he had been trained to maintain. He had done nothing wrong. And yet, the world had already decided that he was guilty. Somewhere in the relentless abyss of the internet, a storm had formed around him, a cyclone of accusations, assumptions, and half-truths twisted into something monstrous. Every news outlet had picked it up. Every journalist with a personal agenda had found a way to spin the story. Some had called him the face of systemic oppression. Others painted him as a relic of a monarchy built on silence and servitude. And the comments. God, the comments. A disgrace to the uniform. He should be stripped of his title. Just another privileged man in power abusing his position. Why didn't he help her? Another example of deep-seated racism in British institutions. The words blurred together, each one a strike to a man who had only ever done what he was trained to do. But what hurt more than the strangers on the internet was the reaction from the very people who should have defended him. His superiors had called for a meeting, not to commend him for his discipline, not to reassure him that he had followed protocol, but to assess the optics of the situation, Henry, the voice of his commanding officer, had been level, careful. This is getting out of control. He had sat rigid in the chair, his back straight, his hands folded on his lap. I followed protocol, sir. His voice had not wavered. The officer had sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know you did. And that's the problem." The words had been like a slap. The problem wasn't the woman who had manufactured outrage, who had weaponized public perception against a man simply doing his job. No, the problem was that he had done exactly what he was trained to do. There had been talks of a temporary suspension, a leave of absence, not because he had committed any wrongdoing, but because the public demanded it. Karma, that's what they called it. Justice for the woman who had been disrespected. Justice for the oppressed. Justice for the story that had been built on a foundation of deceit. He could feel the betrayal settling deep in his bones, coiling in his chest like a sickness with no cure. Henry Whitmore had been raised on honor. His father had been a military man before him, a man who had instilled in him the values of discipline, resilience, and the unwavering belief that if you did the right thing, the truth would always prevail. But this moment, this impossible, unfair moment, was shattering that belief. He was alone in this fight. Somewhere across the city, Samira Al-Fayed sat in front of a camera, poised, composed, the perfect picture of a woman who had suffered a terrible injustice. The interviewer, a well-known journalist with a penchant for amplifying controversy, leaned forward, her expression a careful balance of sympathy and outrage. "Samira," she said, her voice rich with carefully curated concern, "millions of people have watched what happened to you at the Tower of London. Can you walk us through that moment?" Samira inhaled a performance within itself, her hands folding delicately in her lap, as she lowered her gaze. "It was humiliating," she murmured, her voice just soft enough to force the audience to lean in, to listen. "I was ignored. I was treated as if I was invisible, as if I didn't matter." She paused, swallowing. "No one deserves to feel that way. No one deserves to be dehumanized." The interviewer nodded, her expression now tight with controlled anger. "Do you believe this was intentional? A deliberate act of discrimination?" Samira tilted her head slightly, the pause that followed calculated. She knew the power of a lingering silence. "I believe," she said finally, "that this is not an isolated incident." And just like that, the story evolved. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about all the people who had ever felt overlooked, ignored, dismissed. She had positioned herself as their voice. And Henry Whitmore? He was the villain. Inside the barracks, Henry's fists clenched. He turned off the screen, the image of Samira's solemn expression burning itself into his memory. She had won, for now, but the truth had a way of fighting back. And somewhere out there, in the digital depths of the internet, the first cracks in her story were beginning to form. Someone had found the uncut footage. Someone had seen what really happened. And soon enough, the world would see it too. The night was quiet, but it was a deceptive kind of silence, the kind that carries tension beneath its surface, the kind that hums with the weight of something unseen. London, a city that never truly slept, felt strangely muted, as if the air itself had thickened with the unsaid, the unspoken, the undeniable truth lurking beneath layers of manufactured lies. Rick Langley sat at the edge of his bed, the dim glow of his laptop screen casting sharp shadows across his tired face. His room, usually a place of quiet refuge, now felt like the front line of an invisible battlefield. He wasn't a soldier like Henry Whitmore, nor was he the type to be drawn into controversy. He was a security officer, a man of routine, of predictability. But tonight, tonight was different, A new email notification blinked on his screen. "Anonymous sender, you need to see this." His pulse quickened. He hesitated before clicking, his gut warning him that what he was about to uncover was something bigger than he wanted to be involved in, but he had seen too much already. He had stood in the eye of the storm that afternoon, had witnessed firsthand the performance that had ignited a digital wildfire. And now, with the entire world screaming for justice against a man who had done nothing wrong, Rick couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply, profoundly off. The email contained no message, just a video file attachment. Surveillance footage _0411.mp4. Rick exhaled, his fingers hovering over the trackpad. He clicked. The video started in grainy black and white, the security footage capturing a familiar scene, the courtyard of the Tower of London, tourists milling about, cameras flashing, the hum of an ordinary day frozen in time. Then he saw her, Samira Al-Fayed. Even in the grayscale footage, her presence commanded attention. Her gestures were exaggerated, her movements deliberate. Rick watched transfixed as the scene played out exactly as he remembered it, but now stripped of the emotional theatrics that had clouded reality. There was no intimidation, no hostility, no dehumanization. There was only a woman calculating her moment. He watched as she approached Henry, her expression unreadable at first. Then came the shift, the manufactured outrage, the voice rising in controlled increments, the glances over her shoulder, ensuring that the crowd was watching. Then, the crucial moment. She touched him. A clear, undeniable breach of protocol. Rick leaned forward, his jaw tightening. This was the part no one had seen. The viral videos had been clipped, edited, reframed to support the carefully crafted lie. They had shown the shouting, the distress, the supposed humiliation. But they had cut this part out. The part where she reached out, grabbed the fabric of Henry's uniform, physically engaging with him in a way that was strictly forbidden. The part where she stumbled on purpose. Rick rewound the footage, slowed it down. There, asterisk asterisk right there, asterisk asterisk. Her foot movement wasn't accidental. She planted it, twisted it deliberately, allowed herself to falter just enough to create the illusion of distress. She hadn't lost her balance. She had staged it. His stomach turned. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This wasn't a misinterpretation of events. This was deception of the highest order. A woman had stood in one of the most iconic landmarks in the world, in front of a man whose entire life had been built on discipline, on service, on unwavering restraint, and she had knowingly, willfully sought to destroy him for the sake of a narrative. Rick sat back, his heart pounding against his ribs. He knew what this meant. He knew what would happen if this footage was released. The world had already chosen its sides. The battle lines were drawn, and the truth was about to shatter everything. His cursor hovered over the forward button. His mind raced. He knew that once he did this, there was no going back. But then he thought of Henry, asterisk asterisk, a man stripped of his dignity, condemned without trial, left to bear the weight of a lie so expertly woven that the entire world had fallen for it, asterisk asterisk. And suddenly, the choice wasn't difficult at all. Rick clicked, and in that moment, the first crack in the facade of deception began to spread. The world had shifted beneath her feet, and for the first time in her life, Samira Al-Fayed was not in control. She sat alone in her dimly lit hotel suite, her perfectly manicured fingers hovering over her phone, the blue glow of the screen illuminating the sharp angles of her face. The notifications hadn't stopped. They had been relentless, swarming her inbox, her social media, her private messages. But unlike before, when they had been filled with praise, solidarity, and outrage in her defense, asterisk asterisk, now they dripped with something else, asterisk asterisk. Doubt, disbelief, rage. Her own words were being thrown back at her. The same audience that had championed her was now questioning everything. Asterisk, why didn't she fall if she was pushed? Asterisk, asterisk, look at the way she keeps glancing around. She knew what she was doing. Asterisk, asterisk, she touched the guard first. That's not allowed. Asterisk, asterisk, the full footage is out. She lied. Asterisk, Samira felt her pulse in her throat, heavy and suffocating. Her world, so carefully orchestrated, was unraveling at a terrifying speed. She had always been a master at shaping narratives. She knew what to say, how to say it, how to make people feel what she needed them to feel. It was an art she had perfected over the years. She knew how to stand in front of a camera, to let just enough emotion crack through her voice, to pause at the right moments to ensure maximum impact. But this time, she had underestimated something crucial. Asterisk, asterisk, the power of raw, unfiltered truth. Asterisk, asterisk. Her hand clenched around the phone as she scrolled to the message that had shattered the illusion she had so painstakingly built. We need to talk. You've seen the video, haven't you? It was from someone she never expected to hear from again. She stared at the message, the words swimming before her eyes. The video. She had avoided it, ignored it, refused to acknowledge it. She had convinced herself that as long as she didn't watch it, it wasn't real. But now she had no choice. Her thumb trembled as she clicked the link. The screen shifted. The grainy black and white footage began to play. And there it was. The moment everything changed. She watched herself approach the guard, the perfectly poised victim in the making. She had been in control then. She had felt the energy shift, the moment ripen, the perfect storm of perception and performance aligning in her favor. But then, asterisk, asterisk, the part that had been cut from every viral clip, asterisk, asterisk. She watched as she reached out, fingers curling around the stiff fabric of Henry Whitmore's sleeve. Her heart pounded. She had never expected this angle to surface. Her own movements betrayed her. The deliberate step, the calculated stumble, the way she had ensured that every pair of eyes in that courtyard had been on her. She hadn't been victimized. She had staged it. The realization hit like ice water down her spine. The footage ended. Samira exhaled a shaky breath, her fingers gripping the edges of her phone so tightly she thought it might crack. This wasn't just bad. This was catastrophic. Asterisk asterisk. She had spent years carefully curating her image, maneuvering through the world with precision, aligning herself with causes that would elevate her, manufacturing outrage when it served her. She was untouchable, or at least she had been. Until now. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the comments, the same digital battleground where she had once thrived, now turning against her with merciless speed. Asterisk, you used us. Asterisk. Asterisk, people like you are why no one takes real victims seriously. Asterisk. Asterisk, you nearly ruined an innocent man's life. Asterisk. Asterisk, apologize. Or disappear. Asterisk. Her breath hitched. Disappear. That single word sent an icy shiver through her veins. Her empire had been built on perception, influence, control. But if she lost this audience, if the very people who had propped her up now turned their backs on her, what did she have left? Nothing. A sharp knock at the door snapped her from her spiral. Her heart leapt into her throat. She wasn't expecting anyone. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before rising on unsteady legs, smoothing out the creases in her silk blouse, steadying her breath. Another knock, more insistent this time. She swallowed, and then slowly, asterisk asterisk, she opened the door, asterisk asterisk, and the last person she expected to see stood before her. The air in the dimly lit hotel suite felt thick, almost suffocating, as if the very walls were closing in on Samira Al-Fayed. The hum of the city outside was distant, muffled, like the world was moving without her, oblivious to the storm that was about to tear through her carefully constructed reality. She hadn't moved since opening the door. She couldn't. Mason Hargrove stood there, a ghost from the past, his expression unreadable, his trench coat still damp from the relentless London drizzle. He was an enigma to many, but to Samira, he was something far worse. Asterisk, asterisk, a man who never stopped until he uncovered the truth. Asterisk, asterisk. And now, that truth had led him straight to her doorstep. Samira forced herself to swallow, to think, to regain control of the moment, but she felt like a woman standing on the edge of a collapsing bridge. Asterisk, asterisk, no safety net, no way back, only the inevitable fall. Asterisk, asterisk. She had to speak first, had to dictate the tempo of this interaction before he did. You took your time, she said, feigning a confidence she no longer possessed. The words felt empty, hanging between them like fragile threads ready to snap. Mason didn't flinch. He didn't shift, didn't blink. He only watched her, studying her the way a predator studies prey, patient, waiting for the moment to strike. You've seen the video, haven't you? His voice was even, devoid of malice, devoid of theatrics. He wasn't here to argue. He was here to end her. A sickening wave of nausea rolled through her stomach. She'd spent the past 24 hours ignoring it, avoiding it like a fire she thought she could outrun. But deep down, she had known this moment was coming. Still, she couldn't let him see that. So what? She countered, crossing her arms in a weak attempt at defiance. A bunch of trolls online think they found something? People manipulate videos all the time, Mason. Surely you, of all people, know that. For the first time, he smiled, but it wasn't an expression of amusement. It was the kind of smile that held weight, a knowing smirk from a man who already had everything he needed. Is that what you're going with? He asked, tilting his head. That the full security footage is fake? That the angles you didn't think would surface were manipulated? Samira felt her chest tighten, the walls pressing closer, the suffocating realization creeping in. You're assuming a lot, she said, forcing herself to hold his gaze. Maybe you should check your sources before you come knocking on my door with accusations. Mason exhaled through his nose, as if he were tired of the game before it even started. My sources, he murmured, amusement lacing his voice. You mean the same ones who leaked the footage? The ones who started asking the right questions when the puzzle didn't quite fit? Samira's nails dug into her palms. He knew, not just about the video. More than that. But he wasn't done yet. You think this is about just you? Mason asked, stepping forward, forcing her to retreat a fraction into the doorway. You think this is just about a stage altercation at the Tower of London? Samira felt it before she understood it. Asterisk, asterisk, the sheer weight of what was coming. Asterisk, asterisk. She had prepared for backlash. She had expected scrutiny. But there was something in his tone, something cold and certain that made her stomach twist into knots. She forced herself to hold her ground. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said flatly. Mason exhaled, shaking his head. "Samira," he said, his voice softer now but no less dangerous, "you've done this before." Her pulse stilled. For a moment, a singular, terrifying moment, it was as if she had been pulled underwater. Asterisk, asterisk, the air thick, her heartbeat pounding in her ears, the world distorting around her. Asterisk, asterisk. Mason knew. Her breathing shallowed, the muscles in her shoulders locking. She tried to school her expression, but Mason was watching her too closely. She was already losing. "I don't." "You've orchestrated outrage before," he pressed. "Different places, different targets, different causes. But always the same playbook. You stir the fire, let it spread, sit back, and collect the rewards while the world fights over the ashes." Samira's fingers twitched. This wasn't possible. No one had ever connected the dots before. It was years ago. Different circumstances, different narratives, different cities. "How?" "You're insane," she whispered, but the words carried no conviction. Mason reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. A few swipes, and a file appeared on the screen. A name. A date. A location. Bristol. 4 years ago. Samira's throat tightened. "A cafe owner, racially profiled you, refused you service. You recorded part of the argument, edited it, uploaded it. Got national coverage. Got sympathy. Got donations. Got sponsors. Asterisk, asterisk." Another tap. "Manchester. 2 years ago. A verbal attack on public transport. You framed it as a hate crime. You went viral again. Interviews. News cycles. Speaking engagements. Asterisk, asterisk." Another tap. "Birmingham. Last year. A security guard harassed you. Except he didn't. And the uncut CCTV footage, it never made it to the public because it mysteriously disappeared." Samira felt her hands grow numb. How had he found it all? How had he unraveled everything? "You see, people forget," Mason continued, his voice dangerously soft. "Social media moves on. Headlines change. But some of us, we remember, we dig. And when the same patterns start appearing, when the same person keeps showing up in different scandals, asterisk, asterisk, playing the same role, asterisk, asterisk." He let the words sink in. Samira's entire body felt hollow. Her mind raced for a way out. A rebuttal. A counterattack. But there was nothing. No spin, no performance, no carefully crafted monologue would save her now. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I had no choice." For the first time, Mason's expression shifted, just slightly. Not anger, not triumph, but pity. It burned more than anything else. "Tell that to the people you destroyed," he said. And with that, he turned. He walked away, his footsteps echoing down the hall, leaving Samira standing in the doorway of her collapsing empire. The weight of it finally crashing down. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that carries the weight of unspoken truths, of consequences looming just beyond the reach of those who had spent their lives bending reality to their will. The air was thick, charged with the electricity of anticipation, with the unrelenting tension of judgment waiting to be delivered. Samira Al-Fayed sat at the defendant's table, her hands clasped tightly together, the knuckles white from the pressure she exerted. She was dressed immaculately, as always. Asterisk, asterisk presentation was everything asterisk, asterisk, but there was something different this time. The poise, the confidence, the unshakable control she had always wielded like a weapon was cracking at the edges. The world had turned against her, and now, in this room, where truth reigned supreme, there was nowhere left to hide. Across from her, Henry Whitmore sat in rigid silence. A man who had been dragged through the fire. His uniform was pristine, his posture unyielding, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, something scarred. He had been forced to stand at the center of a storm he had never asked for, his name smeared, his dignity stripped, his entire life upended for the sake of a manufactured lie. And now the moment of reckoning had come. The judge, an older man with weary eyes that had seen too many cases of deceit and manipulation in his years behind the bench, cleared his throat. The sound echoed through the chamber. A reminder that this was real, that there was no escaping the verdict that awaited them all. "Miss Al-Fayed," the judge began, his voice even, yet heavy with the weight of what was to come, you stand before this court accused of orchestrating a falsified narrative with the intention of defaming an individual, inciting public outrage, and manipulating events to fit a personal agenda. You have been given the opportunity to respond to the evidence presented against you. Is there anything you would like to say before I deliver my ruling? The question hung in the air, but the courtroom itself had already delivered its judgment. The public, once her greatest ally, had abandoned her. The social media warriors who had rallied to her defense had turned on her with the same fervor with which they had once praised her. Because people hate being deceived. Samira's lips parted, but no sound came. She had spoken for years, had commanded attention, had twisted words into weapons sharper than any blade. But now, at the moment when she needed her voice the most, she found she had none left. Her mind raced for an out, for some last-minute twist, some way to spin this in her favor, but the truth had already escaped her grasp. Because the unedited footage had surfaced. Because the patterns had been exposed. Because Mason Hargrove had torn apart the empire she had built on half-truths and manipulation, brick by brick, until all that remained was the ruin of what she had once been. She could feel their eyes on her. The jury, the reporters, the spectators who had come to witness the fall of a woman who once believed herself untouchable. She clenched her jaw, her nails digging into her palms. She could not break. She had survived worse. And yet, Henry Whitmore was still standing. He had endured the full force of her lies, had been vilified and ridiculed, had nearly lost the career he had dedicated his life to, and he was still standing. That was the difference between them, because Henry had the truth on his side. The judge exhaled, leaning forward as he began to read the verdict. And in that moment, Samira knew. She had lost. The cold air of London bit at Samira Al-Fayed's skin as she stepped out of the courthouse, but the chill that truly settled in her bones had nothing to do with the weather. She had lost. The weight of it pressed down on her shoulders, an invisible but suffocating force, growing heavier with each step she took. The flashes of cameras lit up the pavement before her, reporters barking questions at her from every direction, their voices blending into an overwhelming cacophony of sound that made her ears ring. Asterisk, Samira, do you have anything to say about the verdict? Asterisk, asterisk, do you regret your actions? Asterisk, asterisk, will you be issuing a public apology? Asterisk, asterisk, Samira, Samira, asterisk. She said nothing. She kept walking, her chin lifted, her posture stiff with defiance, but inside, she was unraveling. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. She had always been the one in control, the one who dictated the story, the one who knew exactly how to turn the tides in her favor. She had mastered the art of perception, twisting narratives like a puppeteer manipulating strings. But now, asterisk, asterisk, now, she was the one being controlled, asterisk, asterisk. The public had turned on her. They had once cheered for her, defended her, lifted her onto a pedestal so high she had convinced herself she would never fall. But people hate being deceived. And once the full truth had emerged, once the unedited footage had made its way across every major news outlet, once Mason Hargrove had exposed the pattern in her past, there had been no saving herself. They had called for justice, and justice had arrived swiftly and mercilessly. Her reputation was in ruins. Her social media accounts, once flooded with adoration and unwavering support, were now filled with vitriol, with anger, with disgust. She had lost sponsorships, speaking engagements, contracts. She had lost everything. And now, as she reached the waiting car, the driver already holding the door open for her, she hesitated. For the first time in years, she hesitated. Because stepping into that car meant facing a life she no longer recognized. A life without power. A life without control. A life where she was nothing more than a cautionary tale. She turned just slightly, and in the sea of cameras and shouting reporters, her gaze locked onto one man standing further back, watching in silence. Henry Whitmore, the man whose life she had nearly destroyed. He wasn't smirking. He wasn't triumphant. There was no arrogance in his stance, no gloating in his expression. He wasn't celebrating her downfall. He had simply survived it. And that, more than anything, made her chest tighten with something she didn't quite understand. Karma had come for her, swift and unforgiving. And for the first time in her life, there was nothing she could do to stop it.